The boardroom was already standing when they called his name. Except they didn't. Andre Holloway had led the company in revenue for 3 consecutive years. Every major institutional client had his fingerprints on it. Everyone in the room believed the announcement was procedural. Then the founder cleared his throat and introduced his daughter instead. Andre didn't argue. He didn't even blink. He walked out before the applause finished. 2 years later, that same daughter would knock on his office door with a sealed federal subpoena in her hand. And this time, she wouldn't be asking for a second chance. She'd be asking him to destroy her father. The air in the conference room on the 44th floor of Voss Global was always filtered, kept at a precise 68 degrees. It was quiet, the kind of silence that usually preceded a massive contract signing or a quarterly earnings blowout. Andre Holloway sat at the far end of the mahogany table, his hands flat on the surface. He wasn't looking at his phone. He wasn't checking his watch. He was simply present, the way he had been for 7 years. He had closed the Singapore deal last month. The London expansion was ahead of schedule by 6 weeks. When Richard Voss, the founder, called the emergency board meeting, the consensus was clear. The succession plan was finally being unveiled. It was time for Andre to take the COO role. Everyone knew it. The board members exchanged nods. The CFO sat with a soft, anticipatory smile. Andre felt the weight of the room's expectation, and he found it exhausting. He didn't want the title for the prestige. He wanted it to stop the inefficiencies that were bleeding the company dry. He had systems to implement. He had structural flaws to patch. He was ready to stop playing the game and start running the floor. Richard Voss stood. He smoothed his tie, a man who curated his image with the precision of a jeweler. He looked around the room, his eyes lingering on Andre for a second too long. "We stand at a crossroads," Richard began, his voice practiced and smooth. "Our company is entering a new era, a legacy era, and in times of transition, you look to the future, you look to continuity." He gestured to the side door. Camille walked in. She was 32, an Ivy League graduate with a sharp, guarded expression. She had spent the last 3 years in the marketing department, a role that had kept her largely out of the operational trenches. She walked to the head of the table, not looking at Andre, her posture rigid. "I am pleased," Richard continued, his smile never reaching his eyes, "to announce that Camille Voss will be assuming the role of Chief Operating Officer, effective immediately." The air left the room. It wasn't a shock, it was a physical displacement of pressure. A few board members shifted in their seats, their faces turning into masks of polite neutrality. The CFO stopped smiling. Andre felt the silence stretch. It wasn't the silence of surprise. It was the silence of witnessing a lie so brazen, so public, that no one knew how to breathe into it. He looked at Camille. She didn't look triumphant. She looked brittle. She was holding a leather folder so tightly her knuckles were white. Then he looked at Richard. The founder was watching him. He wasn't looking for approval. He was looking for submission. He was testing to see if the man who built his revenue stream would accept being treated as a placeholder. Andre slowly pushed his chair back. The sound of the legs scraping against the carpet was deafening. He stood up. He buttoned his jacket. "Andre?" Richard said, his tone casual, almost playful. "The meeting isn't over." Andre walked toward the door. He didn't look at the board. He didn't look at the people he had worked beside for years. He walked directly to the founder. He stopped 3 feet from him. "You didn't overlook me," Andre said. His voice was flat, devoid of the hurt Richard clearly wanted to provoke. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the same clinical accuracy Andre used in a sales pitch. "You replaced me." Richard blinked, surprised by the lack of emotion. "Andre, this is simply the direction." "You didn't overlook me. You replaced me," Andre repeated, softer this time. He didn't wait for a rebuttal. He didn't offer a resignation letter that would come later. He opened the glass door and walked out. He didn't slam it. He didn't speed up. He walked with a steady, measured pace that made the board members turn their heads as he passed. He walked into his office, pulled a single drawer open, took his personal items, a framed photo of his son Malik, and a fountain pen, and put them into his briefcase. He left the company laptop on the desk. He left the key card on the blotter. He walked out of the building and into the humid afternoon air. The city noise hit him instantly. The honking cabs, the shouting construction workers, the chaotic, unfiltered life of the street. He didn't go to a bar. He didn't call a lawyer. He drove to his son's school. Malik was waiting by the gate, his backpack slung over one shoulder. He was 10, observant, and possessed an unnerving ability to read his father's silence. When Andre pulled up, Malik climbed in the passenger seat and buckled his seatbelt. "You're early," Malik said, eyeing him. "I am," Andre replied. "You got fired?" Andre started the car and pulled into traffic. He considered lying. He considered the standard parental response. "I'm transitioning." Or, "I'm starting a new venture." But with Malik, the truth was usually the only thing that worked. "No," Andre said. "I quit." Malik paused. "Why?" "Because they changed the rules of the game while we were playing," Andre said, staring at the road ahead. "I don't like playing games I can't win." "Are you mad?" Andre looked at the rearview mirror, at his son's face. The same jawline, the same steady eyes. "No," Andre said, and he realized, with a strange, hollow clarity, that he really wasn't. The anger had burned off in the elevator ride down. All that remained was the realization that his professional identity had been tethered to a foundation that was rotting. "I'm not mad. I'm just finished." The next 48 hours were a blur of logistics. Sent a formal resignation email. He ignored the frantic calls from HR and the board members. He didn't read the press releases that would eventually frame his departure as a pursuit of other opportunities. He didn't care about the narrative. He cared about the asset. He liquidated his stock options. He sold the car. He cleared the board. He started a boutique advisory firm. Holloway Solutions. From a rented office in a converted warehouse district. It was small. It had one desk, 2 chairs, and a view of a brick wall. It was the most honest place he had ever worked. For the first 6 months, he didn't pitch. He didn't cold call. He focused on small-scale consulting for mid-tier firms that were struggling with the same structural inefficiencies he had solved for Voss Global. He wasn't making a fraction of his old salary, but for the first time in years, he wasn't checking his email at 3 a.m. to see if a deal was falling apart due to corporate incompetence. He was building something, brick by brick. But every time he passed a newsstand, he saw the headlines. Voss Global expands portfolio. Camille Voss named most influential under 35. Voss Global stock hits all-time high. The market was ignoring the cracks. Or maybe, Andre thought, the cracks were so deep that they looked like features to the investors. He focused on Malik. They ate dinner together every night. They did homework at the kitchen island. "Dad," Malik asked one evening over pasta, "do you miss them?" "Who?" "The people at the big office." Andre thought about the sales team, the junior associates he had mentored, the admins who kept the gears turning. He thought about the machine he had built. "I miss the work," Andre said. "I don't miss the machine." "Why not?" "Because," Andre said, putting his fork down, "the machine only works if everyone agrees on the same lie, and I stopped believing it." He didn't know then that he was the one who had written the code for the lie. He didn't know that his success, the very numbers that defined his reputation, was the bedrock of the fraud that would eventually come back to his door. He was just a man starting over, thinking he had walked away clean. He had no idea that the ink was still drying on the subpoena. The first client Andre landed was a regional logistics company in New Jersey that couldn't figure out why their renewal rate was declining, despite a growing customer base. Andre spent 3 days on site. He didn't review their marketing deck. He didn't audit their CRM. He walked the warehouse floor, sat in on customer service calls, ate lunch in the break room with the shipping coordinators. On day 4, he wrote a 12-page operational memo that identified 4 structural breakdowns in their post-sale customer experience. None of them were complicated. All of them were fixable. The CEO read it, looked up and said, "We've had 3 consultants in here over the past year. None of them wrote anything like this." Andre said, "They were probably solving the wrong problem." The retainer was modest. It paid 1 month's office rent and half of Malik's school fees. Andre took it without negotiating and went back to work. That was the rhythm of the first year. He wasn't scaling. He wasn't pitching venture capital. He wasn't building a brand. He was solving problems, one company at a time, with the same methodical patience he had used to close institutional deals that took 18 months of relationship building. He had always been more architect than salesman. The corporate title had never fully captured what he actually did. What he actually did was see the shape of a problem before anyone else recognized it as one. The irony was not lost on him. The office slowly evolved. He added a second desk, then a conference table, second-hand, from an estate sale. He brought on a part-time analyst, fresh out of business school, a young woman named Dara, who worked faster than most people twice her age and had the instinct to never waste Andre's time with information he hadn't asked for. Some weeks were good. Some weeks, Andre sat at his desk at 9 in the evening after Malik was asleep, reviewing the books, doing the math again, trying to find room he hadn't found yet. He never complained. Complaining required an audience, and Andre had never believed in performing his difficulty. But the pressure had texture. It had weight. He felt it most acutely on the mornings he dropped Malik at school and watched the other fathers, the ones in fresh suits, the ones with drivers, the ones who had climbed through the same corporate corridors Andre had navigated and were still climbing. He didn't envy them. He had simply traded one form of suffocation for another. At least the one he had now was his. Malik had a habit of asking questions at the worst possible moments. It was a Saturday morning, 9 months into the firm. Andre was at the kitchen table with a stack of contracts, coffee going cold at his elbow, when Malik came down in his soccer cleats and sat across from him. "Are you mad at them?" Malik asked. Andre didn't look up immediately. He finished the paragraph he was reading, placed the pen down, and looked at his son. "Who?" "The people who didn't pick you." It was the directness of a 10-year-old. No diplomatic scaffolding, no softening of the premise. Just the raw question, sitting in the middle of the kitchen like a stone someone had dropped. Andre leaned back in his chair. "No," he said. Malik tilted his head. "Not at all?" "Not anymore." Andre picked up his coffee, realized it was cold, set it back down. "You know what anger costs?" "What?" "It costs you the energy you need to build something better." He paused. "I'm not mad. I'm done." Malik stared at him for a moment, measuring whether that was the real answer or the rehearsed one. The boy had inherited his mother's ability to read silence. "Okay," Malik said finally. He picked up his soccer ball from beside the chair. "Can we go to the park after?" "Yeah," Andre said. 2 hours. Malik nodded and left. Andre sat alone in the kitchen. The contract pages still fanned out in front of him, and let the quiet settle. "I'm done." He'd said it so many times, to himself, in the car, in the mirror, that it had become a kind of armor. And armor, he had learned, was only useful if you understood what it was protecting you from. He wasn't sure anymore what he was still protecting. On the 44th floor of Voss Global, the filtered air still circulated at 68 degrees. But something in the atmosphere had changed, the way a room changes before a storm, not in any one identifiable way, but in the accumulation of small, molecular shifts that only some people sense before others. Camille Voss was one of those people. She had spent her first 3 months as COO doing what most people in her position did when inheriting a role they hadn't fully earned. She listened more than she spoke, read everything twice, and avoided the kind of decisive public posturing that could be immediately dismantled. She was not incompetent. Her father had never been her career strategy. She was too intelligent for that, and too proud. But she also understood how she had arrived in this chair, and that knowledge sat behind her eyes like a splinter she couldn't reach. She began with the operations playbook. She cross-referenced it with the quarterly reports, and somewhere in the fourth month, she found a number that didn't track. It wasn't large, not at first, a variance in the deferred revenue column that seemed like a rounding error, the kind of thing a fatigued analyst might overlook. She flagged it internally and waited. The next quarter, the variance was larger. She went to the CFO, Martin Calls, a trim, silver-haired man who had been with the company for 11 years and who wore the particular kind of confidence that comes not from competence but from proximity to power. She showed him the figures. She kept her voice neutral. "There's a discrepancy in the reserve accounting," she said. "4 million in Q2, 11 million in Q3. I want to understand the classification." Martin looked at the printout she slid across his desk, and for a fraction of a second, something moved behind his eyes. A micro-adjustment, barely visible. Then his professional expression closed over it, like water filling a footprint. "Those are bridge accounting adjustments," he said smoothly. "Timing differences in contract fulfillment recognition. Completely standard." "I'd like the underlying documentation," Camille said. "Of course," Martin said. "I'll have my team compile it." The documentation arrived 6 days later. It was detailed, professionally formatted, and explained nothing. She wasn't certain yet. She didn't have enough. She didn't know if she was looking at incompetence or architecture. She didn't know how deep the foundation went. But she started keeping her own files. The industry press was largely kind to Voss Global through the second year. There were glowing profile pieces on Camille, the usual biographical compression of her education and early career into a narrative of merit-driven ascension. Richard Voss gave 3 keynote speeches. The stock continued its trajectory, but in a trade journal that André subscribed to out of professional habit, a single paragraph buried in a broader market analysis piece caught his eye on a Tuesday evening. He almost missed it. Sources familiar with the company's recent financing activity have noted an unusual pattern of short-term credit utilization among several mid-cap firms in the sector, including Voss Global, whose Q3 liquidity ratios have drawn quiet concern from at least 2 institutional observers. The company has not responded to requests for comment. André read it twice. He set the journal down on his desk and sat very still. Mid-cap firms didn't draw quiet concern from institutional observers for legitimate reasons. Institutional observers were paid to be agnostic. When they expressed concern quietly, it meant they were waiting to see how loud the problem became before they decided which side of it to stand on. André knew Voss Global's books. He had lived inside their revenue architecture for 7 years. He knew what healthy looked like. He knew what managed optics looked like. He also knew that he had stopped paying attention the moment he walked out of that boardroom. He had built a wall between himself and the company with the deliberate intention of never looking over it. He picked the journal back up, folded it to the page, and placed it in the top drawer of his desk. He didn't know yet why he kept it. He would. 2 years is long enough to build a rhythm. André had one. He was up at 5:30, made coffee, reviewed the day's client files before Malik woke up. He packed lunch, always packed lunch, because the ritual of it mattered, because Malik had mentioned once, offhandedly, that his mother used to do it, and André had never stopped after that. He dropped Malik at school by 7:50. He was at his desk by 8:15. Holloway Solutions now occupied the full second floor of the converted warehouse building. 3 full-time analysts, a part-time operations manager, a client roster of 11 mid-tier firms across logistics, healthcare administration, and commercial real estate. Nothing that made headlines, nothing that needed to. The revenue was stable, not spectacular, but stable in the way that a thing built on honest ground is stable. Not flashy, not fragile, not dependent on a single relationship or a single quarter's performance holding its shape. André had stopped tracking Voss Global's stock price sometime around month 14. He had stopped reading the trade journals as carefully around month 18. Not out of indifference exactly, but out of the same self-protective instinct that tells a man who has escaped a burning building to stop looking back at the smoke. He had the folded journal page in his desk drawer still. He hadn't thrown it away. He also hadn't looked at it again. That was the balance he had struck. Not forgetting, not dwelling, just forward. On the morning Camille Voss appeared at his office, Andre was reviewing a contract renewal for a healthcare client in Philadelphia. He had a 10 o'clock call and a site visit in the afternoon. He had told Dara to hold his schedule tight because he wanted to leave by 4 to catch Malik's soccer game. It was an ordinary Tuesday. Then Dara knocked on his open door, and her expression was the particular kind of carefully neutral that meant she had already decided not to tell him how to feel about what she was about to say. "There's a woman here," Dara said. "She doesn't have an appointment. She says her name is Camille Voss." Andre looked up from the contract. He set his pen down. He said nothing for 3 seconds. "Send her in," he said. Camille looked different. Not older, exactly. The architecture of her face was the same, the precise features, the guarded composure. But she had shed something in 2 years. The brittle rigidity he had noticed in the boardroom was gone, replaced by a different kind of tension. The tension of someone carrying weight they have been carrying alone for too long and have finally decided to set down, regardless of the consequences. She was dressed simply. Dark blazer, no jewelry. She carried a leather messenger bag that looked heavy. She didn't apologize for coming unannounced. She didn't offer a pleasantry. She stood in the doorway for a moment, taking in the office, the drafting table, the whiteboard covered in client system maps, the second-hand conference table, and then she looked at Andre. "I need 20 minutes, she said. Andre gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Close the door." She sat. She placed the messenger bag on the table between them. She didn't open it immediately. "I want to say something first," she said, "before anything else." "All right. What happened in that boardroom was wrong." She said it without ceremony, without the performance of remorse. She said it the way someone states a fact they have already processed privately, through too many sleepless nights to count. "You earned that position. You built that revenue architecture from nothing, and my father used your work to make his decision look rational." Andre looked at her steadily. "Is that what you came here to tell me?" "No," she said. "That's just what I needed to say first." She reached into the bag and pulled out a manila folder, then another, then a bound set of internal financial summaries, their edges flagged with color-coded tabs. She laid them across the table with the methodical precision of someone who had rehearsed this moment many times and decided that clarity was the only currency worth spending. The Federal Financial Crimes Division opened a formal inquiry into Voss Global 11 days ago, she said. "It hasn't been made public yet. It will be within the week." Andre didn't move. "Martin Calls, our CFO, retained private counsel 4 days ago," she continued. "My father doesn't know I'm here. He doesn't know that I've been cooperating with investigators for the past 6 months." The room was very quiet. "What do you need from me?" Andre asked. Camille opened the first folder. "Your archived emails from your final 18 months at the company," she said, "and your testimony regarding the institutional client contracts you closed during that period. Specifically, the Singapore deal, the London expansion, and the Meridian Group partnership." Andre's eyes moved to the documents on the table. He recognized the contract names. He recognized the revenue figures. He had lived inside those numbers for the better part of 2 years. "Why those 3?" he asked, though something in his chest was already tightening around the answer. Camille placed a single page in front of him. It was an internal credit memorandum, dated 14 months before his resignation. At the top, his name. Below it, the projected revenue figures from his 3 largest institutional deals, formatted as confirmed forward revenue and used as the primary collateral basis for an emergency credit facility of $47 million. Andre picked up the page. He read it once. He read it again. The projected figures weren't his projections. They were inflated. His actual forecasts had been conservative, the way he always ran them, with a 15% risk buffer built in. Because Andre Holloway had never once submitted a number he wasn't prepared to defend in a room full of skeptics. The figures on this page were 30% above what he had submitted. Someone had adjusted them. Someone had taken his credibility, his track record, his name, and used it to dress up a number that didn't exist. And a bank had loaned $47 million against it. He set the page down very carefully. He looked at Camille. "I didn't submit these figures," he said. "I know," she said. "The investigators know. That's why they need your testimony. They need you to confirm what your actual projections were. Because right now, the only documentation the bank has on file is this version." She tapped the page. "And your name is on it." The weight of that landed slowly, the way serious things always do. Not all at once, but in layers, each one heavier than the last. His name, his reputation for precision and integrity, his 3 years of documented success, all of it had been quietly borrowed, repackaged, and used to prop up a structure he hadn't known was hollow. He had walked out of that boardroom believing he was leaving the problem behind. He had been the problem's foundation. He stood up and walked to the window. The brick wall across the alley was the same as it had always been. Below, a delivery truck was pulling away from the curb. A woman walked by with a coffee cup, not looking up. The city was indifferent in the way it always is, and for a moment, Andre found that indifference clarifying. "How long did you know?" he asked, his back still to her. "About the falsified projections? 8 months, Camille said. About the full scope of what my father built? 4 months. And before that, the accounting variances? A pause. I noticed them 14 months into my tenure." He turned around. "So you had 14 months of suspicion and 8 months of certainty." She didn't flinch from that. "Yes. Why didn't you go to the board?" "Because I thought I could fix it internally," she said. "I thought if I could stabilize the liquidity gap quietly, restructure the reserves, bring in new revenue." She stopped. She looked at her hands for a moment. "I thought I could clean it up before anyone got hurt. But you couldn't." "No," she said. "I couldn't." The silence between them had weight and history in it. 2 years of parallel motion, each of them building something, each of them carrying something they hadn't fully named yet. Then Camille said the thing she had clearly come here to say. Not the documents. Not the subpoena. This. "My father didn't promote me because I was ready," she said. Her voice was level, almost clinical. "He promoted me because he needed insulation." Andre looked at her. "He needed a family name in the seat," she continued. "Someone who would have enough loyalty, or enough confusion, or enough to lose, that they wouldn't look too hard at the books. He thought I was that person." She paused. He was wrong about that. She reached into the bag one final time and placed a sealed envelope on the table between them. "That's from the Federal Investigator's Office," she said. "They'd like your cooperation. They're not compelling you yet, but they will if they have to." Andre looked at the envelope. He didn't pick it up. "I need time," he said. "You have 72 hours, Camille said. "After that, it becomes a subpoena." She stood, collected her bag, and walked to the door. She stopped with her hand on the frame. "For what it's worth," she said, without turning around, "I always knew what you built was real. I think that's the part that kept me honest when I didn't want to be." She left. Andre stood in the middle of his office, the sealed envelope on the table, the financial summaries spread open in front of him, his name embedded in a lie he had never told. He picked up his phone. He didn't call a lawyer. He called Malik's school and told them he was picking his son up early today. Some conversations couldn't wait until dinner. Andre didn't tell Malik everything. He told him enough. They sat in the car outside the school for a few minutes before driving anywhere, the engine idling, the afternoon sun cutting low through the windshield. Malik had climbed in with the instinctive radar of a child who has grown up reading his father's silences, and he waited, without asking why he'd been pulled out early. Andre told him there was a situation involving his old company, that some people had done something wrong, that he had been asked to help make it right. Malik listened. He looked straight ahead through the windshield, the way he did when he was processing something he wasn't ready to respond to yet. "Are you in trouble?" he asked. "Not the kind you're thinking of," Andre said. "What kind, then?" Andre watched a group of kids spill out of the school entrance, backpacks bouncing, completely unburdened. He thought about how to explain moral jeopardy to a 10-year-old without turning it into a civics lesson. "The kind," Andre said slowly, "where the right thing and the safe thing aren't the same thing." Malik absorbed that. "Which one are you going to do?" "I don't know yet," Andre said. "That's why I came to get you." Malik looked at him then. "You came to get me because you don't know what to do?" "I came to get you," Andre said, "because I didn't want to sit with it alone." They drove home. Andre made dinner. They didn't talk about it again that night. But at 10:30, after Malik had gone to bed, Andre sat at the kitchen table with the sealed envelope from the federal investigator's office, the manila folders Camille had left, and a fresh yellow legal pad. He opened the envelope. He started reading. He read until 2 in the morning. What the investigators had assembled was methodical and devastating in the way that financial fraud always is when it finally gets written down in plain language. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just a long sequence of decisions that each seemed survivable in isolation and catastrophic in aggregate. Richard Voss had begun quietly leveraging company assets against short-term credit facilities approximately 4 years ago. The initial amounts were manageable. The early rationale, as best as the investigators could reconstruct from internal communications, was a timing gap, a bridge between projected revenue and actual revenue that Richard had expected to close within 2 quarters. It didn't close. The timing gap became a structural gap. The short-term credit became long-term dependency. The company's publicly reported financials continued to reflect a healthy, growing enterprise because the accounting classifications were engineered to ensure they would. Martin Calls, the CFO, had signed off on the classifications. Richard had approved the framework, and the institutional lenders who had extended the $47 million credit facility had done so on the basis of 3 things: the company's historical performance metrics, its projected forward revenue, and the credibility of the revenue architecture. Andre's name, Andre's numbers, Andre's track record. All of it dressed in figures he had never submitted. He set the investigator's summary aside and opened the second folder. This one was Camille's personal documentation, the files she had been building quietly over 14 months while trying to hold the structure together with the equivalent of paper and goodwill. Near the back, behind the accounting variance reports and the internal memos, was a single spreadsheet that made Andre stop breathing for a moment. Employee pension fund allocation records. He cross-referenced them with the liquidity summary from the investigators. He did the math 3 times, because the first 2 times he assumed he had made an error. He hadn't. Richard Voss had redirected a portion of the company's employee pension reserve fund into the operational liquidity pool. Not all of it, not in one move. In small, incremental transfers, each one within the threshold that triggered mandatory reporting. Each one documented under a classification that obscured its origin. 412 employees. Their retirement contributions, some of them going back 8 and 9 years, quietly commingled with the funds Richard was using to keep the quarterly numbers presentable. Andre put the pen down. He sat back in his chair. He had spent 2 years building something honest, brick by brick, because he believed that the foundation you build on determines what you can become. He had believed it with the fervor of a man who had watched a corrupt structure up close and chosen to walk away from it rather than be absorbed by it. He had not known, when he walked away, that his footprints were still inside it. He called James Okafor at 7 the next morning. James had been a senior account manager at Voss Global for 6 years, a quiet, precise man who had worked on 3 of Andre's largest institutional deals and who had stayed with the company after Andre left, largely because he had 2 kids in private school and a mortgage that didn't care about corporate ethics. They met at a diner 4 blocks from James's apartment. James arrived first, already nursing a coffee, already looking like a man who hadn't slept cleanly in weeks. Andre sat down across from him and didn't bother with a preamble. "The pension fund," Andre said. James looked out the window. "You know? I need to know what you know." James wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. He was quiet for a long moment, and in that quiet, Andre could see the specific exhaustion of a person who has been holding a secret that has been getting heavier every day. "I found out 3 months ago," James said. "One of the finance associates mentioned something off the record. I started asking questions quietly, not too many." He paused, enough to understand what I was looking at. And I've got 2 kids, Andre." His voice didn't crack, it just flattened. "I've got people on my team who've been with this company for a decade, people who are 58 years old, and counting on that pension to retire. If this goes public the wrong way, if the company collapses before there's any kind of protection structure in place," he stopped. "They lose everything," Andre said. "They lose everything," James confirmed. The diner was filling up around them. A waitress refilled coffee without asking. Someone laughed loudly, 2 tables over. The ordinary machinery of a morning continuing. "So you've been sitting on it," Andre said. "I've been hoping someone smarter than me figures out how to do this without burning the whole building down with people still inside it," James said. "Is that person you?" Andre looked at him. "I don't know yet." James nodded slowly. "That's not the answer I wanted." "I know," Andre said. "It's the honest one." They sat for a while longer. James told him that morale inside the company had been deteriorating for months. That middle management was being told the liquidity strain was temporary, market-driven, solvable. That most people believed it because they needed to. That the ones who had started to suspect something were doing what people do when the truth is too expensive to afford. They were looking slightly to the left of it. Andre drove home and sat at his desk and looked at the legal pad where he'd started making notes the night before. At the top, he had written 2 columns. On the left, testify. On the right, cost. The right column was longer. Camille came to his office the following afternoon, this time with an appointment. She sat across from him, and he placed the pension fund spreadsheet on the table between them. She looked at it. "You found it. You knew when you came here," Andre said. "Yes." "You led with the falsified projections," he said. "You didn't lead with this." Camille was quiet for a moment. "If I had led with this, you would have shut the door before I finished the sentence. You needed to understand the full structure first." Andre considered that. It was a tactical decision, and it was probably correct. It also meant she had made a calculated choice about how to manage him, and he wasn't sure yet how he felt about that. "How long did you try to fix it internally?" he asked. 14 months of suspicion, she said, during which I restructured 3 operational budgets, brought in 2 new revenue streams, and tried to engineer enough surplus to quietly backfill the pension gap without touching the reserves. She paused. "I needed approximately $9 million of internal surplus to make it work without anyone knowing." "How much did you generate?" $3.2 million, she said, "in 14 months of restructuring. So you failed." She didn't look away from that. "I failed," she said, "and every month I spent trying to fix it quietly was another month the exposure grew. My father kept moving money. He was managing a problem I didn't fully know the size of because he was hiding the current figures from me, while I was trying to fix the historical ones." She looked at the spreadsheet. "By the time I understood the full scope, the gap was too large for any internal correction, and I had spent 14 months not reporting it." "Which makes you partially liable," Andre said. "Which makes me partially liable," she confirmed. Yes. The room was still. You came to me, Andre said, because you need a witness who can confirm that the performance data was falsified. Because without that, the credit fraud case is harder to prove, and your father's attorneys will argue that the accounting classifications were legitimate. But if I testify that those weren't my projections, then the falsification is corroborated, Camille said, and the case against him holds. Andre looked at the legal pad, the 2 columns, the long right side. That evening, after dinner, Malik was doing homework at the kitchen island when he looked up without any particular setup and asked the question in the same offhand way he asked everything that mattered most. Dad, Malik said, if you tell the truth, does it hurt people? Andre was washing dishes. He turned off the faucet. He stood at the sink with his hands wet and the question sitting in the air between them like something solid. He had spent 48 hours reviewing evidence, doing math, meeting James in a diner, sitting across from Camille in his office, filling up a yellow legal pad with columns that kept refusing to balance. He turned around and looked at his son. He opened his mouth. And for the first time in as long as he could remember, Andre Holloway had no answer. Not because he didn't understand the question, but because he understood it completely. Andre called the federal investigator's office on a Thursday morning. He didn't call to say yes. He called to negotiate. 3 conditions. Non-negotiable. Structured bankruptcy. Not immediate dissolution. Orderly, supervised, survivable. Employee pension funds ring-fenced through emergency state mediation before any public announcement. And Richard Voss held personally liable, not the company's remaining shell. The man himself. The investigator, Reyes, listened without interrupting. When Andre finished, she said, "We'll need your testimony within 2 weeks." "You'll have it," Andre said, "with the conditions on record." He hung up, sat still for a long moment. Then he pulled the yellow legal pad toward him. The 2 columns, 36 hours of moral arithmetic that never fully balanced, and drew a single line through both of them. The testimony was unremarkable in the way that honest things often are. A beige federal hearing room, fluorescent light, attorneys on both sides of a long table, Andre in a dark gray suit, no notes, no prepared speech. When they asked if the revenue projections bearing his name reflected his actual submissions, he said no. When they asked what his actual figures had been, he recited them from memory, accurate to the decimal, because he had never submitted a number he didn't know by heart. When they asked why he had chosen to testify voluntarily, he paused. "Integrity isn't about being clean," he said. "It's about being accountable when you weren't." The court reporter's fingers kept moving. Richard Voss was indicted on 7 counts, his personal assets frozen. The structured bankruptcy proceeded. The pension mediation returned employees 83 cents on every dollar. Not whole, not painless, but not nothing. Camille settled a civil regulatory action, issued a public statement with no deflection in it, and left corporate life entirely. The restructuring administrator called Andre 3 weeks later with an offer to return as interim CEO, significant compensation, a corrective narrative, a homecoming. Andre said no. Instead, over the following months, he quietly hired 7 displaced Voss Global employees into his firm. No press release, no framing, just work that needed doing, and people who knew how to do it. He picked Malik up from soccer practice the evening the last hire started. "Is it over?" Malik asked. "The legal part," Andre said. "The rest takes longer." Walking away hadn't freed him from responsibility. It had simply delayed the moment he'd have to face it.